Night on the hospital warship Silver Iris never truly went dark. The ship kept a steady glow in its corridors. It looked like clean paper and tired skin. Air scrubbers whispered behind grills. Every few steps, a handwash station chimed when someone forgot to use it. Rowan Hale stepped through the main intake lock. He carried a small medical case in one hand. His travel bag hung from the other. He was a Terran disaster physician. He was trained for outbreaks that began in crowded shelters. He had seen how they ended when order failed. The first smell that met him was antiseptic layered over warm metal. A line of evacuees bent around the triage archway. Children slept on folded thermal blankets. Their hair clung to damp foreheads. A volunteer moved down the row with a cup of water for each mouth. She poured carefully, as if every swallow had a price. A medic waved Rowan forward. Her badge read Joran Vale, Refuge Dex Coordination. Her eyes looked steady. Her hands moved like someone who had not stopped working. Joran asked, "Dr. Hale?" Rowan said, "Yes." Joran said, "Welcome to Silver Iris, if you can call this welcome. We took in another convoy from the Dune Belt front. The fevers started on the shuttle." Rowan watched a boy pull his sleeve over his mouth. He leaned into his mother's shoulder. The mother did not cough. Her eyes were red from dry air and too little sleep. Rowan asked, "How much clean water are you issuing?" Joran's jaw tightened. Joran said, "Less than the posters say. The plant is stable. The hospital load keeps climbing. The Queen wants the refuge decks to feel human, not rationed." A stretcher rolled past, pushed by two orderlies. The patient lay rigid. He breathed fast. A sensor cuff blinked amber. The cuff's tone sounded too cheerful for what it meant. Joran lowered her voice. Joran said, "You were requested for infection control. Also for the garden." Rowan said, "The Verdant Bay." Joran nodded once. Joran said, "Our pharmacy starts there. Leaves, extracts, salts. The bay keeps this ship from becoming a tin can full of pain. If it fails, we do not just lose medicine. We lose the only story people still believe." Rowan followed her through a corridor where floor plating was scuffed by gurney wheels. They passed nurses in sealed aprons. Their eyes tracked every hand that reached for a railing. Twice, someone shouted that staff were hoarding. No one shouted back. At a junction marked with simple arrows, Joran stopped at a door with a green stripe. Joran said, "Verdant Bay is through there. First, you sign in with security. Commander Arvik Dornay will want to meet you. He wants to meet everyone." Rowan exhaled slowly. On a ship like this, security and medicine fought over the same space. Both claimed they were saving lives. He set his bag down. He scanned his ident. He stepped into the security vestibule. Inside, a camera tracked his face. A second scan read the contents of his case without opening it. The system did not trust labels. Beyond the glass, a pair of armed crew stood by the triage doors. Rifles were held low but ready. An older evacuee stared at them as if the weapons were aimed at his grandchildren. Rowan had seen that look on Earth after storms and blackouts. Hunger rewrote rules fast. This was not only a hospital. It was a dam holding back panic. Commander Arvik Dornay met Rowan in a plain security office off the main spine. The room smelled of disinfectant and reheated coffee. Arvik wore a clean uniform and no helmet. His sidearm stayed in view. Arvik said, "Rowan Hale, Terran disaster physician, assigned to infection control." Rowan said, "Outbreak containment and triage flow." Arvik slid a tablet across the table. Arvik said, "My conditions. You do not enter sealed wards alone. You log every sample. You keep your personal comms out of refuge decks. You speak to no relay channel without clearance." Rowan read, then looked up. Rowan said, "You think I might be an infiltrator?" Arvik said, "I think everyone might be. That is how a ship stays whole." Rowan signed. Rowan said, "Then I need something too. If I call for quarantine, you move fast." Arvik leaned back. Arvik said, "You request. I approve if the risk is real. The Queen carries the blame either way." The escort that followed him through the next gates was quiet. Two iris doors opened like careful eyelids. Past them, the ship grew cleaner and calmer. It felt like order could be sealed behind metal. They stopped at a private anteroom. The guard tapped a panel and stepped aside. Queen Valith Saren stood by a viewport. Her hands were behind her back. She was taller than Rowan expected. Her posture was precise, as if she carried the ship on her shoulders. Under the white corridor light, her skin held a pale opal cast. Fine ridges traced her cheekbones like subtle armor. Her dark hair was braided close for duty. A single silver cord ran through it. When she turned, Rowan saw the cost of command. Her eyes were steady. The skin beneath them looked marked by nights without sleep. Valith said, "Dr. Rowan Hale." Rowan said, "Your Majesty." She made a small motion that dismissed ceremony. Valith said, "On Silver Iris, titles do not stop infections. Sit." Rowan sat. The chair felt like an odd luxury. It was built for someone who could pause. Valith did not sit. Valith said, "This ship is my promise. If the refuge decks believe we still save lives, they endure the war. If they believe we have become a machine that selects winners, my crown city fractures before any enemy breaks our hull." Rowan chose his words. Rowan said, "A promise needs procedures. Procedures need speed." Valith said, "Yes, they also need truth. Rumor is faster than any medicine." She stepped closer. Her voice lowered. Valith said, "I asked for you because you know how panic spreads. Stop it with discipline. Protect our wards. Protect Verdant Bay." Rowan thought of the coughing child in line. Rowan said, "If I find contamination, I may have to close access. People will accuse you of cruelty." Valith's expression did not change. Her fingers tightened once behind her back. Valith said, "People will accuse me of something no matter what I do. I can accept pain. I cannot accept collapse." Rowan said, "Commander Arvik will watch me." Valith said, "He will. He watches everyone, including me. Do not mistake it for hatred. It is his way of keeping the ship intact." Rowan stood. Rowan said, "Then we have an agreement. I work fast. You back the ugly decisions." Valith held his gaze. A thin weariness showed through her control. Valith said, "I will back them if they are honest." Rowan left the chamber with new weight in his chest. It was responsibility. It was also quiet respect. And that felt dangerous in wartime. Verdant Bay smelled slightly wrong the moment Rowan stepped inside. Wet leaf and nutrient mist should have been comforting. Instead, there was a thin metallic edge, like a coin held too long. Plants grew in shallow racks under steady lamps. Their roots hung in clear channels. The whole bay looked almost domestic inside a warship. Chief botanist Lisa Quen met him at the entry seal. Her sleeves were rolled up. Her hands were stained green. Lisa said, "It started on the broad leaf racks, speckling along the veins. Then the roots began to film." Rowan leaned over the waterline. The channel looked clear. A faint sheen clung to the walls. He opened his case and used a field test kit, the kind meant for remote clinics. The test strip changed slowly. That was the alarm. Natural blooms were loud. This was quiet. Rowan said, "It is trying to stay invisible." Lisa swallowed. Lisa asked, "Invisible to who?" Rowan took a second sample from a different rack. The same slow curve appeared again. Rowan said, "We isolate the loop, close the bay, cut it off from the wards and refuge decks until we know what this is." Lisa's face tightened. Lisa said, "If we close, the wards lose medicine. People are already staring at the staff like gatekeepers." Rowan said, "If we do not close, we send the problem into every patient. It will wait until it is everywhere." The entry seal chimed. Commander Arvik Dornay stepped in with 2 guards. He stopped at the clean line. His eyes scanned the bay without touching a thing. Arvik said, "Dr. Hale, you requested a shutdown." Rowan said, "Quarantine. Verdant Bay is contaminated. The pattern suggests deliberate seeding." Arvik's expression held steady. Arvik said, "Deliberate is a heavy accusation." Rowan said, "It is a precise one. The rise is slow on purpose. It buys time for spread." Arvik looked past them toward the corridor. It was as if he could already hear the refuge decks reacting. Arvik said, "If I lock this bay, Civilian sea guards close their last source of relief. We will have fighting before night. Rowan did not raise his voice. Rowan said, if you keep it open, you will have bodies before night. Arvik exhaled once. Arvik said, restricted operation, no civilian entry. Pharmacy draws only from racks you certify as clean. Staff stays on shift but not confined. Rowan felt the gamble in his bones. Rowan said, then we treat this bay like a crime scene. Logs, deliveries, valve changes, no shortcuts. Lisa nodded. Her jaw was tight. Rowan sealed the samples and stepped back through the entry. The lights in Verdant Bay stayed on. The pumps kept cycling. Too many lives depended on it. 2 hours later, Rowan stood in the corridor. Sealed samples pressed to his palm. Behind the door, pumps continued their steady cycle. Ahead, the triage line would ask for medicine. Asking did not change physics. Rowan understood what the Queen meant by promise. A promise could be sabotaged without a single shot. Silver Iris trembled as docking clamps took the weight of the resupply tender. Cold air rolled through the logistics corridor. It carried the smell of wet canvas and metal dust. Rowan Hale followed guiding lights toward the cargo ring. He heard coughs behind him. Crates drifted out on magnetic rails. Each was stamped for medical growth and ward supply. Joran Vale stood beside a scanner pedestal. Her mask was lowered for one fast breath. She looked past Rowan toward the refuge decks line that never ended. Rowan asked, another convoy? Joran said, from Crown City Asterhold, seeds, nutrient solution, cloth, and filters, and people who think boxes fix morale. A man in a dark formal coat stepped in with 2 aides. His badge carried the Royal Logistics Directorate seal. He moved like the ship owed him silence. He said, Dr. Rowan Hale, I was told you were decisive. Rowan said, Verdant Bay is under restriction after a contamination signal. He said, I am Marin Rahl. I am here to stabilize distribution and confidence. His gaze slid to a child on a blanket, then to the ward doors. A nurse carried out a small tray of cups. Each cup held a careful sip of water. The line watched as if the cups were votes. Rowan pointed at incoming pallets. Rowan said, protocol safe harvest requires quarantine and tests. One bad lot can poison the entire bay. Marin kept his smile. Marin said, quarantine is a word people hear as denial. They are dying in those corridors. Doctor, your procedures cannot be an excuse for delay. Commander Arvik Dornay entered with 2 security crew. His presence tightened the room. His eyes stayed on Marin, not the cargo. Arvik said, Marin Rahl, your authority is logged. Your access waits for the Queen's manifest signature. Marin inclined his head, polite and sharp. Marin said, Commander, I will not fight you. I will remind you what happens when medicine stays in boxes. Rowan felt last night's slow test curve in his mind. It had been patient and wrong. He kept his voice even. Rowan said, testing does not mean we stop growing. We isolate new racks and keep the loop separate. We start seedlings in sealed trays while we screen the waterline. Marin stepped closer. Marin said, and if your screening takes too long, will you stand in the refuge decks and explain the funerals? Joran shifted. She watched the line outside. Fear was already forming in stares. Arvik looked at Rowan. Arvik said, what do you need to test first? Rowan said, seed wash, nutrient concentrate, and the first tray runoff. Not one tie into the closed-loop waterline until cleared. Arvik nodded once. Arvik said, conditional release. Seeds go to Chief Botanist Lisa Quen only. No civilian labor and no open access. Dr. Hale samples first, then growth begins. Marin paused. He let out a controlled breath. Marin said, acceptable, but no corridor alarms and no public announcement. Marin looked at Rowan. Marin said, keep your fear contained. Rowan met his gaze. Rowan said, fear is manageable, silence is not. Rails hummed again. Crates floated toward Verdant Bay under armed escort. Rowan walked with them. A new war line took shape inside the ship. Verdant Bay glowed under steady lamps. Green against steel. The racks looked calm, but Rowan sensed tension in every pump cycle. A garden on a warship was never only a garden. Lisa Quen met him at the clean line. Gloves were damp from constant rinsing. Her hair was tied back tight. Her eyes fixed on incoming pallets. She held a slim slate against her chest. Lisa said, "He is forcing the schedule." Rowan said, "He is forcing the story. If he controls the story, he controls the deck." Lisa tapped the slate and opened the seed chain ledger. Rows of entries scrolled with handling notes and custody markers. Rowan leaned in, searching for the first break in the chain. Rowan said, "Show me the last 3 deliveries." Lisa filtered the record. A block of entries appeared. Then a space where a custody marker should have been. Her fingers stopped over the gap. Lisa said, "That cannot happen. The ledger is right-locked after signature. It does not lose a mark by accident." Rowan said, "Someone edited it, or someone forced a rollback and wrote over the trace." Lisa glanced toward the bay doors. Lisa said, "Only my crew and logistics have access. Security can audit, but they rarely look at plants." A nurse passed by with a tray of leaf extract ampules. The nurse moved fast, head down. It was as if avoiding eye contact could avoid blame. Rowan watched the tray disappear into a service hatch. Rowan said, "People are waiting for those. That is why this works. A slow attack does not need explosions." Lisa swallowed. Lisa said, "If we report this, they will say I accuse the crown. They will say I create panic in wartime." Rowan said, "They will say that no matter what, if we stay quiet, we hand them the bay." They carried the slate out of Verdant Bay and toward the private anteroom. At the Iris gate, Arvik scanned their hands and inspected the slate like a weapon. Arvik said, "The Queen is in council. You have minutes. Choose your words carefully. Accusations are weapons too." Inside, Queen Valith Saren stood over a table of floating ward maps. Her posture was perfect. Her eyes showed exhaustion. Marin Ral was already present. Calm, as if the room belonged to him. Rowan said, "Your Majesty, the new seed lot is here. I request full quarantine screening before any integration. We also found an integrity gap in the seed chain ledger." Marin said, "A ledger gap can be a system sync error under combat load. It is not proof of sabotage." Lisa said, "It is not a sync error. The custody marker is missing and the timestamp sequence breaks. My pump logs show manual override near the same window." Valith asked, "Marin, did your office touch her ledger?" Marin said, "My office ensures compliance. We did not delete anything. Dr. Hale is new to our pressures and sees danger everywhere." Rowan said, "The contamination signal in Verdant Bay is real. We keep production running if we isolate new racks. We must not tie new waterlines into the closed loop until cleared." Valith looked down at the maps. Refuge decks icons pulsed with patient counts and fever flags. She raised her head. Valith said, "Give me a path that keeps the ship calm. And keeps people alive." Rowan said, "We restrict access and test fast. We share only what is necessary. In plain terms, if we say nothing, rumor will speak for us." Marin said, "If you speak, you validate the enemy narrative." Valith held still for a beat. Her voice stayed calm and final. Valith said, "We will not close Verdant Bay. We will not announce contamination. Arvik, lock civilian access and keep pharmacy draws to verified racks only. Rowan Hale and Lisa Quen will screen the new lot at once. Marin Ral will hold the pallets in custody until cleared. If you disagree, tell me now." Marin said, "I agree. Confidence must be protected." Rowan said, "This choice buys time. It also creates a shadow. Shadows are where enemies work." Valith said, "Then bring me light quickly. Before rumor becomes law." Rowan left with Lisa. He carried the ledger gap like a weight. The decision was a compromise. It felt like the kind an enemy would predict. The rumor hit refuge decks before the evening ration call. It moved through whispers and glances. People stopped trusting masks. When Rowan arrived, the dispensary line had pressed into a tight wall. Joran Vale met him near the ration window. She was breathing fast. Her mask hung at her throat for one moment of air. Joran said, "They heard the garden is infected. They heard the Queen is hiding it." A toddler coughed against a parent's shoulder. A man slapped the counter and demanded antiseptic concentrate. A woman held up a fevered child. Her eyes were fierce with terror. Overhead, a public display flickered with a breaking bulletin. It was not from the ship network. It was a broadcast spliced into the public relay. The screen showed a blurred ward bed and a trembling hand. A voice spoke in an alien tongue. Then it shifted into rough Terran English. The voice said, "Silver Iris is a plague ship. Valith Saren murders her own under the mask of mercy." Rowan said, "It is crafted to shame. People do not fact-check fear." Jorin said, "That is not our ward footage. They stole it." Commander Arvik Dornay pushed in with a security line. His crew formed a barrier. Rifles were held at warning angle. Arvik said, "Clear the corridor. Return to assigned cots." No one moved. A young man stepped forward, fists tight. The young man shouted, "You lock us in, then you let us die quietly." Arvik said, "You will die loudly if you keep pushing." Rowan stepped between Arvik and the crowd, palms open, voice steady. Rowan said, "Back up, give space so the sick can breathe. We are still dispensing medicine." A woman near the front stared at him. She said, "You are Terran. Are you here to judge us too?" Rowan said, "I am here to keep your children alive. Help us keep order, and you get what you need." The broadcast looped again. It added a new claim. It named the Queen as a liar who used the garden to poison dissent. Rowan felt the outline of the attack. Admiral Charon Voss wanted doubt, not bodies. Doubt made every future decision harder. A bottle clattered on the deck plates. The crowd surged, pushing toward the window. Someone screamed when a shoulder hit the rail. Arvik leaned close to Rowan. Arvik said, "We seal the deck. We cut movement and stop the riot." Rowan said, "If you seal hard, it becomes a prison. Then the rumor becomes proof." Arvik said, "Proof does not matter in a riot. Control does." Arvik raised his hand. His crew lifted rifles to warning level. Fear rippled through the crowd, then turned to anger. Rowan grabbed Jaren's sleeve. Rowan said, "Move the sick to the side passage. Keep the toddlers out of the crush." Jorin nodded. She pushed through with 2 medics. Rowan lifted his voice, not quite a shout. Rowan said, "Step back. If you fall, you will not get up again." For one breath, the front line hesitated, then another bottle struck a rail and shattered. The smell of cheap disinfectant flashed through the air. The ship intercom crackled. Queen Valith Saren's voice came through, filtered and steady. Valith said, "Refuge decks. This is Valith Saren. I will not hide behind doors while you suffer. I am ordering containment on one section only. Not as punishment, as protection." A hush spread, thin and uncertain. In the distance, quarantine iris gates began to cycle. A section of the deck would close around the worst fevers. Some shouted that she was a tyrant. Some sobbed in relief. Most simply stared, feeling the ground shift under their faith. Arvik exhaled. Arvik said, "She chose. She will be hated for it." Rowan watched the gate seal. He watched a mother press her cheek to her child's hair. Later, in a service alcove, Rowan opened his test kit. He ran another strip from Verdant Bay's sample and sealed it. The curve rose slowly, patient as a plan. Beyond the hull, Charon Voss had not fired a shot. He had taught the refuge decks to doubt. Doubt spread faster than any infection. Silver Iris had stopped feeling like a hospital. It started feeling like a pressure vessel. By the next ship sleep cycle, fever tags on the ward map had multiplied. Rowan Hale watched the new pattern form. It matched his fear. In Green Bay Ward, beds filled service bays. People lay on mats between supply lockers. They were wrapped in thin thermal cloth. Nurses moved in a careful rhythm. Then they broke it to run. Air scrubbers worked harder. The corridor still smelled of sweat and metal. The ship felt like it was holding its breath. Medic Jorin Vale met Rowan at the intake arch. Her eyes were raw. Her voice stayed controlled. Jorin said, "Respiratory cases doubled. Not from the wind. Not from crowd heat. It moves like handling, not breathing." Rowan looked at the triage feed. New patients arrived in clusters. They did not share family ties or shuttle routes. They shared contact points. The same wash station. The same refill spigot. The same tray line from Verdant Bay. Rowan asked, "Any change in ration draws from Verdant Bay?" Joran said, "The same boxes. Different hands. People keep swapping cups in line. They think it will cheat the gates." A woman in the next bay pulled off her mask to argue with the nurse. The nurse did not shout back. She only held the mask out again, like a patient hand. Commander Arvik Dornay stepped in with 2 guards. His gloves were clean. His face was not. Arvik said, "Quarantine iris gates held last night, but the deck is angry. They call it a cage now." Rowan kept his voice low. Rowan said, "It is a cage if we use it for control. It is protection if we use it for timing." Arvik said, "Timing does not calm a crowd. A story does. They do not trust the Queen's story." Rowan walked toward the private council corridor. He passed a wall panel where someone had scratched words into paint. The letters were jagged and hurried. They did not name disease. They named betrayal. Queen Valith Saren met him near the ward map table. She stood under cool light. Shoulders squared. Her hair braid had loosened at the nape. That small detail felt louder than any speech. A cup of water sat beside the map, untouched. Rowan said, "It is spreading along the same route. It is not random. It follows shared handling points." Valith said, "I know the counts. I read them with every meal I do not finish." Rowan did not soften it. Rowan said, "We should have closed Verdant Bay sooner. We should have announced risk and enforced separation. Politics slowed quarantine." Valith's eyes sharpened. Valith said, "Politics keeps this ship from tearing itself apart. If I lose the refuge decks, I lose the war. If I lose my seat, someone worse takes it." Rowan said, "Then we lose people anyway. We lose them quietly, then loudly. Keeping control is not the same as saving lives." Valith stepped closer. Her voice dropped, almost gentle. Valith said, "You speak like a man who can walk away. I cannot. If the crown falls, the Iron Mandate block rises. They will purge dissent, and call it order." Rowan felt the ache of truth. He also felt the steel edge of his own. Rowan said, "I am not asking you to be loved. I am asking you to be early. Every hour of delay becomes a week of grief." Valith held his gaze. For a moment, her mask slipped. Exhaustion showed. So did fear. Valith asked, "What do you want from me, Rowan? Tell me in plain terms. Tell me what I must destroy." Rowan took a slow breath. He had expected this question. He still hated answering it. Rowan said, "I want authority to isolate the loops. I want to cut access to fresh seedlings until screened. I want you to stand in front of the anger." Valith said, "Arvik will ask for force. Marin will ask for ceremony. You ask for truth that hurts." Rowan said, "Truth hurts once. Denial hurts until there is nothing left." Ward alarms rose again. The ship did not wait. Valith turned to the map and issued quiet orders. Rowan left with one certainty. Both of them were right. The price would choose for them. Verdant Bay was still green, but it looked thinner now. Some racks had been roped off. Leaves were tagged for disposal. Pumps ran at reduced cadence, like a heart holding back. A faint film clung to one clear channel. It returned after every wipe. Chief botanist Lisa Quen stood by the closed-loop manifold. She held a sample tube up to the light. The liquid inside looked clear. That was the problem. Clear meant the enemy had time. Rowan said, "We need to amputate. We split the waterline. We drain the suspect branch into waste tanks. We keep the clean racks alive." Lisa's jaw tightened. Lisa said, "You want to kill half the bay. That is half our pharmacy. That is half our promise." Rowan said, "Half the promise is better than none. If we keep feeding the loop, the bay becomes a factory for harm. We can regrow leaves if we keep the root branch clean." Joran Vale entered with a cart of empty ampule trays. Her hands shook once, then steadied. Joran said, "We ran out of leaf extract in Green Bay Ward. A child died waiting for fever control. His mother did not scream. She just stared at the ceiling." Lisa looked away. Rowan felt the hit behind his ribs. Rowan said, "That is why we cut now. If the bay collapses, we lose every child like him. A door seal chimed. Marin Rahl entered as if he owned the air. His coat was spotless. His eyes took inventory in a single sweep. Marin said, Dr. Hale, you are proposing destruction. You are doing it without a public mandate. Rowan said, I am proposing containment. Destruction is what happens if we hesitate. Marin smiled slightly. Marin said, containment fails in a crowd. It fails under rumor. It fails when a single labor crew ignores your signs. Burn the entire bay, strip it to metal, and restart with certified stock. Lisa asked, restart with what? We do not have spare water. We do not have spare nutrient. We do not have spare time. Marin said, then we stop pretending. This ship is not a garden. It is a war asset. Assets must be secured. Rowan said, a hospital is not an asset. It is a line between living and dying. Marin said, and a line can be moved. He brought up a logistics chart. Marin said, seal refuge decks in full. Stop movement. Let security enforce it. Then the Royal Logistics Directorate can assume medical command. Order can return. Jorin took a step forward. Her voice cracked. Jorin said, that would make us jailers. It would turn fever into a sentence. Marin did not look at her. Marin said, war already is a sentence. We decide who serves it. Rowan looked at the manifold again. He imagined the loop as a river. If the river was poisoned, you cut channels. You did not burn the valley. Rowan said, your plan helps the enemy. It proves their broadcast. It turns mercy into a weapon against us. Marin's smile returned. Marin said, Doctor, you speak as if you are above politics. Politics is the only tool that moves bodies and boxes. Choose. And choose fast. Every hour you argue, the Queen bleeds trust. Rowan understood then. Marin did not need to plant the infection himself. He only needed to force choices that looked cruel. Rowan said, I will cut the bay. Not burn it. I will log every valve and every hand. I will match them to the seed chain ledger gaps. Marin said, log what you like. Dead people do not read ledgers. When he left, the bay felt colder. Lisa stared at the manifold, eyes wet and furious. Jorin gripped the cart handle until her knuckles paled. Rowan keyed a private note for the Queen. Short and blunt, the enemy was inside their choices. He could not name Marin yet, but he could feel the trap closing. Rowan ordered the suspect branch flushed into a sealed waste tank. Lisa set crew to cut hose clamps and label every tool. Jorin returned to the wards with empty hands. Rowan watched manifold lights shift. He waited for the next wrong reading. The next strike did not come with missiles. It came as a change in airflow. A low hum rose in the clean air spine. Filters that had held steady began to pulse amber. Then they flashed red, one after another. Rowan was in Green Bay Ward when the first nurse shouted, pressure drop, seal the side corridor. Arvik Dornay arrived at a run. Arvik said, cross-contamination risk is rising. Someone is forcing dampers open. From the far corridor, fists hit the iris gate. Someone shouted for air, not medicine. Arvik listened, then set his jaw. He told security to hold the line. He told them to keep rifles down. Rowan heard the order and felt how thin mercy had become. Rowan felt the cold clarity of a coordinated hit. Admiral Caron Voss was not guessing now. He was timing it to their weakest moment. Jorin Vale sprinted past with 2 medics. Jorin said, refuge decks are pushing gates again. They think the air is poisoned on purpose. Rowan said, get the toddlers into the inner bay. Keep them away from the vents. Arvik pointed down the corridor. Arvik said, lock the trunk damper at junction 7. If we do not lock it, the ward fills. Rowan said, if we lock it wrong, we suffocate someone. Give me a manual read. A maintenance tech appeared at the ward door. Her coveralls were stained with coolant and leaf residue. A badge read Kessa Orin, Bay Engineer. Kessa said, the damper controls are spoofed. The panel reads closed, but blades are half open. I can lock it by hand at the junction, but the crawl space is contaminated. Arvik said, no. He grabbed her arm. Arvik said, you do not go in there. Kessa pulled free. Kessa said, "If we do nothing, everyone breathes it. I can hold my breath longer than a ward can." Rowan stepped closer. He saw simple courage, not heroic, practical. Rowan said, "Take a mask, take a sealant pack, do not talk once you go in. Save air." Kessa nodded. She took the pack and a compact wrench. She disappeared into the service hatch and slid into darkness. Lisa Quen called Rowan from Verdant Bay. Her voice was ragged. Lisa said, "Our coolant loop is failing. If the air turns, we lose the clean branch." Rowan looked at ceiling vents. He imagined spores and aerosols riding invisible streams. This was pressure used like a knife. A hard knock sounded from inside the duct line. Then silence. Kessa's voice came through a service speaker, thin and strained. Kessa said, "I have the blades. They were forced open with a manual wedge. I am removing it." A scrape followed, then a heavy thud. Arvik said, "Kessa, respond." No answer. Filter lights shifted. Amber returned to steady green. One panel at a time. The clean air spine steadied. Lisa called again. Her voice broke. Lisa said, "The bay air is stabilizing. I can save the clean racks. We will lose the rope section, but we can keep the rest." Rowan opened the hatch with Arvik. They pulled Kessa out. Her mask seal was intact. Her eyes were closed. Her fingers still held the wrench. A thin smear of blood marked her temple. Jorin stood behind them. Jorin said, "No, not for a damper." Rowan checked for breath, then stopped. He did not speak a diagnosis aloud. Later, Queen Valith Saren walked through Green Bay Ward. She did not bring a speech. She brought her presence, and it looked like pain. People watched her pass. Some bowed, more did not. Someone muttered, loud enough to be heard, "Garden Queen." Another voice added, "Cagemaker." The names spread in small bites. They were easier than truth. Valith paused near Kessa's covered form and lowered her head. Rowan stood at her side and spoke quietly. Rowan said, "They will blame you for breathing. Because blame feels like control." Valith said, "And control is what I promised." Her voice stayed calm. Her eyes looked far away, like a star that could not be reached. That night, Verdant Bay kept running. Half its racks went dark, cut away to save the rest. The ship stayed alive. The Queen stayed in command. Trust drifted farther from her, one rumor at a time. Silver Iris kept moving, but it no longer felt steady. 2 days after Bay engineer Kessa Orin died in the duct crawl, the ship carried a new kind of silence. People did not argue as loudly. They watched doors. They watched guards. They watched each other. Rowan Hale worked in the narrow space between medicine and logistics. He was not in the wards this shift. He was in a small processing bay beside Verdant Bay. Stainless benches held sealed tubes and damp gloves. The air smelled of leaf resin and coolant. Chief botanist Lisa Quen slid a slate across the bench. The seed chain ledger filled the screen. Custody marks and handling notes ran in clean lines. In the middle, the gap stared back like a missing tooth. Rowan said, "It is the same window. The same hour the curve appeared in the waterline." Lisa rubbed her eyes. Lisa said, "A ledger does not forget. A person forces the system to accept a lie." Rowan tapped through pump logs and valve histories. He matched time stamps to the waste tank flush he ordered after the first signal. He matched them again to the moment pallets arrived from the resupply dock tender Mallow 3. The pattern was not in plants alone. It was in the route. Rowan said, "The change point is not in the bay. It is on the rail corridor before the clean line. Someone opened a pallet where cameras do not see." Lisa stiffened. Lisa said, "Only logistics and security have access to that corridor." Rowan looked at sealed sample tubes. The fluid was clear. The test curve rose in a patient arc. He felt intent behind it. Rowan said, "The contamination is designed for delay. It takes authority to move boxes fast." Commander Arvik Dornay entered without knocking. He carried a small case of storage drives. His uniform collar was wrinkled, like he had slept in it. Arvik said, "I pulled the corridor footage you requested." Rowan said, "You believe me now?" Arvik set drives down and stared at the slate like it could bite. Arvik said, "This stopped being a debate after Kessa. There is a blind strip on the rail corridor. The cover never went back." Arvik opened the footage. Pallets glided under cold lights. Crew scanned seals and logged entries. Then, in the time window of the ledger gap, the footage glitched and jumped. Not a full drop, a clean splice. Rowan leaned closer. Rowan said, "That is not random. That is a cut." Arvik nodded once. Arvik said, "Someone with access to the recorder did it." Lisa looked from the screen to Rowan. Lisa said, "Who would dare?" Rowan zoomed in on the pallet edge before the splice. A thin tag flashed for an instant. It was not a standard ward marker. It was a logistics expedite flag. It was used to override quarantine holds. Rowan said, "That flag is issued by the Royal Logistics Directorate." Arvik's jaw clenched. Arvik said, "Marin Ral." Rowan lifted a hand. Rowan said, "Not yet. We need proof a person ordered it, not a clerk under pressure. If we accuse wrong, we fracture what little trust is left." Lisa stared at him, tired and sharp. Lisa said, "You still think trust can be repaired?" Rowan said, "It has to be." Arvik looked at the blind strip again. Arvik said, "I can pull access logs for the recorder room." Rowan nodded. Rowan said, "Do it. Keep it quiet. If Refuge Dex hears we are hunting a traitor, they will invent 10 more." A few hours later, Rowan stood outside the Queen's private anteroom. The corridor was calmer than Refuge Dex, but the calm here felt heavier. Guards checked his identity and scanned his case. The ship trusted no one, not even with grief. Queen Valith Saren met him alone. Her posture was straight. Her eyes looked older than they had on his first day. The silver cord in her braid was gone. A plain tie replaced it, as if she had stopped decorating hope. Valith said, "You asked for private time." Rowan set the data slate on the small table. He did not sit. Rowan said, "We found the change point. The ledger gap matches a spliced camera window. The pallet was flagged to bypass holds." Valith listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked at the slate. Then at him. She measured the risk of every word. Valith said, "Say the name you are avoiding." Rowan kept his voice steady. Rowan said, "Marin Ral benefits from the bypass. So does Admiral Charon Voss. If our ship looks cruel, Voss wins without firing. If my accusation is wrong, you hand your enemies a martyr." Valith's mouth tightened. Valith said, "I have already handed them a story. They call me names on Refuge Dex. They say I build cages." Rowan remembered scratch marks on a wall panel, jagged letters made by a shaking hand. Rowan said, "You built a hospital in a war. A cage is what fear calls any locked door." Valith walked to the viewport and stared into dark. Stars looked cold and indifferent. Valith said, "If I lose this ship, I lose my seat. If I lose my seat, the Iron Mandate block takes command. They will turn Refuge Dex into a labor hold. They will burn Verdant Bay and call it purity." Rowan stepped closer, not touching her, but closing the distance of trust. Rowan said, "I am afraid too. I am afraid your mercy is being used like bait. They push you until you must choose between kindness and control. Either choice stains you." Valith did not look away. Valith said, "Then what do we do, Rowan?" Rowan answered with the plainest plan he had. Rowan said, "We stop letting them choose. Give me authority over infection control. Give me authority over quarantine gates. Give me authority over Verdant Bay loop decisions. A single chain of command. No silent overrides. No last-minute flags." Valith's eyes sharpened. Valith said, "If I give you that, Marin will say I handed the ship to a Terran. The Iron Mandate block will call it foreign capture. Refuge Dex will hear only the insult." Rowan nodded once. Rowan said, "Then do not make it about me. Make it about procedure." Valith's face softened for one breath. The Queen looked like a person again. Valith said, "I have not had the right to be a person for a long time." Rowan said, "Then let me carry some of the weight." Valith pressed her thumb to the seal pad. The wall unit fed out a thin strip of authorization film. stamped with the Thalara crown seal. She held it out with 2 fingers, as if it could burn. Valith said, "This order gives you the authority you asked for. It also paints a target on you." Rowan took the strip. The film felt warm from the unit. Rowan said, "Truth can be defended, but it has to be caught first." Valith studied him, then let her guard drop for one breath. Valith said, "And what about us?" Rowan chose the honest answer. Rowan said, "We survive the next choice. Then we decide what we are." That night, Rowan, Arvik, and Lisa built a trap that looked like routine. They prepared a small seed shipment, clean and inert, sealed in standard crates. The nutrient concentrate inside was harmless. It carried a trace marker that would show up on any rapid test strip. A simple signature that could not be denied. Arvik logged pallets with strict custody seals and placed them in the cargo ring under normal lighting. He also placed a second set of tags, hidden under rails, where only a person with corridor access would find them. Lisa watched monitor feed from Verdant Bay. Lisa said, "If he diverts it, it means he will break procedure again. If he does not, we learn nothing. The next strike lands anyway." Rowan did not look away from the route display. Rowan said, "He will divert it. He cannot help it. He needs the next crisis to force his takeover." They waited through a ship sleep cycle. In the morning, pallets moved, standard scan registered, then route shifted. Pallets did not go to Verdant Bay. They turned toward refuge decks supply instead, where anger already lived close to the surface. Arvik spoke on the ship channel, voice tight. Arvik said, "Route altered. Someone used an expedite override." Rowan felt his stomach harden. Rowan said, "Show me who. We need hands, not panic." Arvik met them at the rail junction. He wore plain gloves, no sidearm visible. 2 security crew stood at distance, ready but not threatening. The point was evidence, not a riot. Marin Rahl arrived as if summoned by pallets. He wore the same spotless coat. He looked at crates with calm that felt rehearsed. Arvik stepped into his path. Arvik said, "Those pallets were quarantined for Verdant Bay screening." Marin answered as if reading a report. Marin said, "Verdant Bay cannot supply refuge decks today. The wards are stable for the moment. Refuge decks is not. We adjust priorities." Rowan stepped forward and held up a fresh test strip. The trace marker showed on the reed, clear as a fingerprint. Rowan said, "You diverted an untested lot into a volatile deck. That is not adjustment. That is provocation." Marin did not flinch. Marin said, "It is management. You prefer controlled tests. I prefer controlled outcomes." Arvik gestured toward a wall panel. Arvik said, "Security recorded your override entry. The seal pad matched your access. The footage cut was not an accident." Marin's smile thinned. Marin said, "My access exists to solve problems. Your logs exist to delay solutions." Rowan kept his voice even. His hands felt cold. Rowan said, "Kessa Orin died sealing a damper because someone forced the air system open." For the first time, Marin's eyes showed anger. Small, controlled, but real. Marin said, "Lives are always the currency. The question is who spends them." Arvik stepped closer. Arvik said, "You are under detention pending the Queen's review." Marin looked past Arvik toward the command spine, as if listening to a distant clock. Marin said, "Do you think this ends the war? Admiral Voss does not need me to finish you." An alarm tone cut through the corridor. Not a ward alarm. A long-range contact alert. Urgency belonged to hull and orbit. Arvik looked up toward the ceiling speaker. His face tightened. Arvik said, "External contact. Black Wake Coalition signature." Rowan felt timing like a weight. If Marin was boxed in, Charon Voss would stop playing with rumor. He would use force to finish the symbol. A technician's voice came over the ship channel. Technician said, "Multiple contacts accelerating toward intercept. Bearing matches the last relay ghost. Impact window is short." Marin's gaze shifted to Rowan. It looked almost satisfied. Marin said, "Admiral Voss will strike now. He will break your hospital and call it justice." Rowan turned toward the corridor that led to the command spine. In his hand, The test strip still showed its marker. Proof of internal sabotage. Proof that might not matter if the ship died. Arvik spoke fast on the ship channel. Arvik said, "Lock down cargo ring. Keep refuge decks calm. Move the Queen to command. Medical teams to crash stations." Rowan started running. The hospital had been a promise. Now it was a target. And the enemy was close enough to touch. Silver Iris went to battle without looking like it. Ward lights stayed white. Corridors stayed quiet. Only the deck under Rowan Hale's boots told the truth. A subtle vibration ran through plating as ship posture changed. The alert tone rolled through hull again. Long and low. On command feeds, contact markers multiplied, then tightened into a spear point. Admiral Caron Voss was closing with discipline, not rage. Commander Arvik Dornay met Rowan at a junction where medical corridors crossed the clean air spine. His face was set. His voice stayed controlled. Arvik said, "We are switching priorities. Defense and propulsion first. Everything else will feel it." Rowan felt it already. Air scrubbers surged, then dipped, as if breathing through clenched teeth. A ventilation grill overhead clicked, then fell silent. Chief botanist Lisa Quinn called from Verdant Bay. Her words were rushed but clear. Lisa said, "Grow lamps just dimmed. Pumps are slowing. Bay temperature is rising." Rowan started moving. Verdant Bay greeted him with warmer smell. Plant resin mixed with hot metal. Green racks looked tired. Condensation that used to bead on leaf edges now evaporated too fast. Lisa stood by manifold with two technicians. A screen showed power allocation. The bay's share was shrinking like a retreating tide. Rowan asked, "How long can you hold with reduced flow?" Lisa shook her head. Lisa said, "Not long. Roots are already stressed. If pumps stall, we lose the clean branch." Rowan looked at racks they saved in the last cut. Those plants carried fever reducers and basic antiseptics. Those medicines stopped panic from becoming stampede. The roped-off section still sat dark, waiting for disposal. A second alarm hit, shorter, sharper. Defensive grid was cycling. Arvik's voice came over local channel. Arvik said, "Enemy is not firing heavy. They are probing our intakes. They want us to contaminate ourselves." Rowan felt cold anger. Caron Voss did not need to breach the hull. He could make the hospital choose between clean air and clean water. Between wards and garden. Lisa leaned in close. Lisa said, "They are spoofing clean air dampers again. I can feel pressure swings in here." Rowan opened bay maintenance panel and pulled up loop map. If the air spine went unstable, it would push unfiltered flow into service corridors. That would carry whatever was left in waste branch back toward wards. Rowan said, "We cut precisely. Not more, not less." Lisa's eyes flashed. Lisa said, "You already took half. You want more." Rowan did not argue with emotion. He argued with math and loss. Rowan said, "We keep fever line alive. We keep antiseptic line alive. We drop comfort line." Lisa knew what he meant. Pain bombs and sleep gels mattered, but not more than breath. Lisa exhaled, then nodded once. Lisa said, "Do it, but we do it clean." They moved as a team. Lisa called valve names. Rowan verified with test strip. He watched for trace marker from their trap. Reed stayed stable. That was good. The sabotage now was outside the bay. It was in the ship's lungs. Rowan sealed a branch, drained it into waste tank, and watched bay pressure settle by small margin. Plants in that rack would not recover. He did not look at them too long. A nurse opened bay door, eyes wide. The nurse said, "Doctor, Green Bay Ward is asking for more fever control. They say children are shaking." Rowan wiped gloves and turned back to Lisa. Rowan said, "We will have enough, not for comfort, for survival." Lisa's voice softened. Lisa said, "Then make it count." Rowan left Verdant Bay with a case of ampules. He felt the enemy had forced them to become harsher to stay humane. The command spine smelled of ozone and hot insulation. Panels along ceiling flickered as ship dumped heat into radiators. Air stayed breathable, but only because something else was being starved. Rowan reached main junction outside refuge deck's gates. Queen Valith Saren was there already. She wore a plain field jacket over her formal suit. No ornaments, no crown symbol. Guards stood back. She wanted the deck to see her face. Not rifles. A crowd pressed behind Iris gates. Some were sick, others were only afraid. Eyes tracked overhead vents as if air itself had become enemy. Arvik stepped to Valith's side. Arvik said, "The enemy is shaping us. They want us to seal, then choke. If we hold gates, we keep control. If we open, we risk spread." Valith looked at the crowd. Rowan saw her swallow once, then steady herself. Valith asked, "How many can move without crushing each other?" Joran Vale pushed through with a small triage team. Her mask was on. Her voice carried. Joran said, "2 lanes. One for the sick, one for families with children. We keep the rest back." Rowan heard ship creak. A faint shift as Silver Iris changed orientation. Defensive officers would be begging Valith to keep every corridor sealed and every door under gun. Valith turned to Rowan. Valith said, "You told me denial hurts until nothing is left. Is this the moment you meant?" Rowan kept his hands open. He did not stand close like a shield. He stood close like witness. Rowan said, "If you open a corridor, you lose tactical advantage. You also remind them this is a hospital, not a cage." Arvik's eyes narrowed. Arvik said, "You are asking her to accept risk. Risk that becomes my problem in minutes." Rowan met his gaze. Rowan said, "It is already your problem. Charon is counting on us to become what they accuse us of being." Valith took one breath, then another. She spoke into corridor speaker. Voice steady, not grand. Valith said, "Refuge decks. This ship will not abandon you. We will open a relief lane for the sick and for children. You will move when medics tell you to move. You will keep your masks on. If you break the lane, you will hurt your own." The crowd shifted. Some faces softened. Others stayed hard, trained by rumor to distrust kindness. Arvik keyed his channel. Arvik said, "Security. Rifles down. Hands visible. Make a wall with bodies. Not threats." One officer hesitated. The officer said, "Commander, if they rush, we lose the junction." Arvik answered without raising his voice. Arvik said, "Then we hold them with our backs. Not with bullets." Rowan felt something in him loosen. Not relief. Respect. Iris gates cycled open to narrow gap. Air rushed through. People surged, then stopped as Jaren's team lifted hands and guided first child forward. The child clung to a blanket that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Rowan watched flow, fragile as a bridge made of breath. A new alert flashed on wall panel. External contact distance had dropped again. Charon Voss was close enough to force another system probe. Overhead, a vent grill clicked. Rowan looked up and caught faint ripple in airflow pattern. Someone was still trying to manipulate dampers. The enemy wanted a single cough in the wrong place. The enemy wanted a single video that could be broadcast as proof. Rowan leaned toward Valith. Rowan said, "They will try to ruin this. They will make mercy look like negligence." Valith kept her eyes on moving line. Valith said, "Then we document everything. Every hand, every mask, every time stamp. If they weaponize my mercy, I will weaponize the truth." Rowan nodded. Rowan said, "I will stand with you. Not as cover, as responsibility." Valith did not answer with romance. She answered with a quiet nod. A shared burden accepted in public view. For the first time since broadcasts began, a refuge deck's elder raised a hand in small, uncertain salute. It was not forgiveness. It was a pause in hatred. And that pause was enough to keep the lane from collapsing. The strike that followed was not a dramatic explosion. It was a series of tight, controlled hits. It tried to make Silver Iris fail its own mission. A pulse of interference rattled the clean air spine. A second probe pushed waste branch pressure up. The ship answered with hard discipline, sealing and venting in careful bursts. Rowan ran between junctions with test strips and a handheld sensor. He checked airflow where it mattered most. Lisa stayed in Verdant Bay. She watched remaining racks like a pilot watches engine. Arvik held the human line in corridors. Valith stayed visible, refusing to disappear into armored control rooms. Then threat markers on command feed began to widen. Karon Voss was pulling his spearpoint back. Arvik relayed update as he walked with Rowan toward command spine. Arvik said, "He is disengaging, not fleeing, repositioning." Rowan felt no victory. Rowan said, "He tested us. He learned what breaks us. He will return with something cleaner." In command bay, Valith watched retreat arcs in silence. Her face did not brighten. A disciplined enemy never leaves empty-handed. A final broadcast slipped into public channel. Brief and calm. The voice said, "Silver Iris survives today, not because of mercy, because you paid with your own. I will meet you again. Queen Saren, when your people cannot afford the price." Feed cut. Ship kept moving. Wards kept filling. Nothing felt solved. Marin Rahl was held in a secure compartment near recorder room, guarded by Arvik's most trusted crew. His trial under wartime law was short. Evidence did not need speeches. Spliced footage, expedite overrides, diverted pallets, intent made visible by repetition. Rowan did not attend as a spectator. He submitted logs and left. He had seen enough judgment in wards. Later, Valith met him outside Verdant Bay. The bay looked smaller now. Not in size, in meaning. It was no longer a single symbol that could be attacked. Lisa and her team had begun cutting it into modules. Sealed racks with independent pumps and clean reservoirs. Lisa spoke first. Lisa said, "1 bay is a target. 10 modules are a supply line." Jorin arrived with a list of refugee clusters along projected route. Jorin said, "Send first modules to smallest camps, where 1 rack can change a week." Valith nodded, then looked at Rowan. Valith said, "I cannot give them a parade. Not after names they called me. Not after Kessa." Rowan answered softly. Rowan said, "Do not give them a parade. Give them medicine that arrives on time. Give them doors that open when it matters." Valith held his gaze for a long moment. The bond between them was not secret and not promise. It was a shared standard, measured in breath and clean water. The first Verdant Bay module shipped out that evening. It rolled on magnetic rails past the same corridor where the ledger had been cut. This time, every seal was visible, every hand was logged. War did not end because of kindness. Kindness kept a kingdom from turning into what it hated. That was a victory that could be carried. Silver Iris kept drifting through contested space. Scarred but steady. Wards were still crowded. Air still rationed. Every decision still carried a cost. Yet the ship did not become a prison. The kingdom did not become the thing it feared. Rowan Hale watched the first Verdant Bay modules roll toward refuge decks and then out to the smallest camps. Not as a victory parade, but as proof that care could survive pressure. Queen Valith Saren stood beside the loading rail in silence. She let work speak for her. In that quiet, Rowan understood what their oath truly meant. War would return in other forms. Admiral Karon Voss had promised that, but as long as a single rack of medicine reached a trembling child on time. The enemy had not taken everything. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. You will find more American English science fiction audiobooks here, designed to help you relax, unwind, and drift into sleep with a hopeful, human ending.